the show Not Without Right, a Shakespeare in the Public Domain podcast. Of course, it is me, Dawn Monique Williams, your host. And today I am joined by my good friend and Shakespeare expert. I learned everything from this woman, Lavina Jadhwani. Hi, Lavina.
Hi, I learned a ton from you.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be on the show. So happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
So I know you as a director, well, primarily as a director at the time that we met, and then we collaborated as a director dramaturg duo. And I know these days you're doing a lot of writing and adaptation.
Yeah, mostly that. Mostly that. So I'll hop back in the saddle for the right directing project. But I'm both as you know, I'm going through chemotherapy right now, so I'm a little more focused on things that don't involve me leaving the house as much. But also the dog really likes it when I write plays from home. She really does.
I guess.
But also, I was hoping we were going to talk about this. So, I don't know, let's just dive in. So I identify as an adapter, not a playwright, because everything I write is based on something else. I've yet to put anything out in the world that is solely my own plot, story, etc. And I feel like for me, that muscle really came from, as you well know, when you get hired to direct a Shakespeare play and or dramaturg a Shakespeare play, you're responsible for the cut. And yeah. I actually, I went on a little bit of I got on a small soapbox about it in grad school because I was like, hey, wait a minute. Only when you direct a Shakespeare play are you responsible for the kind of, additional dramaturgy / playwriting that happens, adaptation that happens when you do the cut. And you don't have to do that when you pick up in the same way you pick up, a Lauren Yee play, a Susan Laurie Parks play, that thing, a more contemporary play, right? The text is more fixed in those plays. And so I was like, hey, why am I not getting paid more for this job? Right. And something that, I really appreciated about our time at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival was at least at the time, there were workshops for the Shakespeares, for the canonical text as well. And in part, amongst other things, to workshop the cut. And I just always really appreciated the additional time and value that was added to that because I don't know what your experience has been, but for me in, my contemporary practice, which is largely nonprofit theater, it sort of falls somewhere between the director and dramaturg, right? But it's this additional labor that we're doing that I don't know, I feel doesn't get talked about enough. And for me, the first, yeah, I'll just say this. It took a pretty mediocre white man just saying, well, you're an adapter, you direct Shakespeare, for me to go, oh, I guess I am an adapter. Somebody else kind of had to assign it for me and say it with that kind of confidence that I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do wear this title. Okay.
Yeah, you totally do. I mean, it's interesting though to hear you say that you don't wear the title of playwright when we talk about Shakespeare, because all he also was a radical adapter.
Yeah.
But I don't. I mean, we sort of visit the title of playwright upon him anyway. We don't know how all of those Elizabethan dudes were thinking of themselves because they all were straddling the line between invention and reproduction.
Well, and yeah, something I was planning on talking about. We'll go as far down this rabbit hole as we want to, but for me, I grew up with Shakespeare, studying it as literature in school, and so I think therefore it felt I don't know, it felt it was always something put on a pedestal, and it felt there was a right way to do it, and I was always in pursuit of that because I grew up I was a STEM child. I grew up in the gifted program, right? So that's what I did. But it wasn't really until somebody said, I don't remember when it was. It might have been actually finally reading and watching Lauren Gutterson's Book of Will when I truly came to understand, oh, we don't have definitive versions of this text, right? The versions of the plays that this dude wrote down are inaccessible to us, right? I know you know this, right? But we have at best an actor's memory of what this play was based on, their performance of it however many years after the fact. And so like there was something about that just kind of like broke my brain, broke the field open for me, because I suddenly realized, well, wait a minute, if we don't have definitive versions of this text, then there can't be one definitive way about going about it. Like that just can't be. Like, because I would have teachers be like, oh, you have to honor this comma. And I was like, well, for all we know, that comma was a smut of the printing press, right? So like, you think it's important to honor this comma. I might think it's important to honor something else. And I think like, I don't know, for me, I guess I say I stick because to adaptation, although yes, to your point, right? Everything is adapted from something. I was talking to my little brother about the state of contemporary musical theater, which I feel like is much more your field than mine. But he had just seen, he's a muggle, as we say, he's a software engineer, theater enthusiastic audience member. And he and his fiance had gone to see Moulin Rouge, and they were really into it. And I was talking with him about, it's interesting. Again, I sort of study the trends as they relate to adaptation, because it's really interesting to me that right now there are a lot of movies being adapted into musicals, right? And one of the many reasons Moulin Rouge was accessible to him was because he already knew a lot of the songs from the radio. And then, so he's like, well, so we're talking about Moulin Rouge, and what was Moulin Rouge based on? And I was like, oh, well, it was based on La Boheme, but then La Boheme was based, right? So like, how far back do we want to go into the like, yes, everything is technically adapted from some, I think Mean Girls is super interesting model right now, right? Because that is a movie that was adapted from a nonfiction book, Queen Bees and Wannabes, about bullying, and then got adapted into a musical for the stage, and then this musical for the stage got adapted back onto the screen. Like, I just think that's wild.
Yes. I mean, similar with Hairspray, right? That it had a film treatment, then it had a musical treatment, then that musical treatment came back to get a film treatment. So, yes, I'm bubbling over with so many things. So I'll just say this first thing, and then I'll actually go backwards. I was teaching Aristotle's Poetics to a group of dramaturgy students just yesterday. And it's so funny, this idea of like adaptation, because we were talking about like Aristotle's, like what he meant by spectacle versus like what we mean by spectacle. And sort of the idea that like all of that other stuff won't save the show if the plot, I mean, essentially Aristotle's argument is that if the plot does not hold, all of the visual stuff won't save the show. And now our spectacle is far beyond what Aristotle probably even imagined, but it had me thinking about the musical Back to the Future, which I have recently seen. And that is a film that I love. I love that movie so big. So I was really excited about that musical. And I was like, so here's where all of this spectacle will not save you if but the thing that I was telling my students is I was like, but we know the story actually works because the film was very successful. So we know the plot is actually good because the film was successful and had a whole franchise built around it. I was like, so somewhere what fell apart was the book of it, right? And that adaptation, the actual words, the actual lexis, according to Aristotle, is sort of what didn't hold. And that, because I'm like, that DeLorean on stage, that's cool, but it wasn't enough. All the spectacle, the flying car, it was not enough. And I love the movie. Okay, there. Now I want to go back a little bit more to you saying that you were, a STEM kid and introduced to Shakespeare's literature, and see if you can identify the first, or at least an early sort of introduction to or experience with Shakespeare that maybe happened long before you were a theater person.
I mean, we were just talking about Baz Luhrmann. I do think like I was in middle school when that R&J with who was it? It was Leo and Claire Danes?
Yes.
And I think like, I mean, it was sexy, first of all. Second of all, I mean, I was familiar with the story. It was before I had studied it because I studied it in high school. But I think also, and I do prefer seeing these plays performed on stage. It's like there is something, right? Live performance, your heartbeats sync up with your other audience members, all that direct address. But I think there was something about like that, and then a few years later, right? 10 Things I Hate About You, very different thing. But I think that when I talk about early influences on my adaptation style, I think it's 10 Things I Hate About You and Emma, of course. And I think there was just something about seeing these film adaptations because I grew up a Bollywood brat. I'm still a Bollywood brat, as you well know. And, the majority of Bollywood films are adapted from either another play or maybe an Indian epic, maybe another Indian regional film, or, maybe an English. I actually think there's a movie called Bang Bang that is, it used to be on Hulu, maybe it still is. It's Hrithik Roshan and Kareena Kapoor, and it's a copy of a Tom Cruise, Cameron Diaz movie called Night and Day. And I actually think I'm totally biased because, watching it for the plot sometimes means watching it for both those actors, Bollywood abs. They're both very fit. But I do think there's I think 10 Things I Hate About You is an adaptation that I think exceeds the source material. And that was the first time I learned that could happen. But yeah, there was something about, I think also, that R&J in terms of its casting for the time was pretty inclusive. And it was contemporary. And yeah, there was something about that. I just remember their first meeting behind, what are they like, behind those a fish
like
tank?
A fish tank.
Yeah. And sometimes as directors, I was told at a teacher's grad school who said sometimes you're picking up a Shakespeare play, the director is really like the conductor of the music, I think, right? Because you talked about on previous podcasts that technically these things were directorless when first written, right? But so I see my job somewhere between coach and conductor, and I think that I just loved the way that movie was conducted. It really just sort of the way it lined up the visuals with what was happening in the text felt like it was revealing things from the text as opposed to doing something to it, which, sometimes, I think it's great when you see these, more auteur directors who are muscling the play into doing something. But I feel like that's not necessarily, I don't know, how somebody like you or I necessarily, I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like that's not necessarily how everybody approaches the text.
Certainly not me. I have no interest in being auteur, though I have come to accept that somebody who doesn't know me and wasn't part of the process might see a show that I've directed and label something as concept. Yeah. But I feel so allergic to concept. I feel like, no, everything came from the text. Everything, we mined the text and everything is rooted in the text. Everything came from the text. But maybe it's like an abstraction as opposed to a literal thing. Auteur directors frighten me. While I can appreciate the outputs, yeah, the process sounds horribly abusive.
Yeah, I think it's just, and I don't know, it's interesting, right? Because I do primarily write these days. And I had a director ask me recently because they were like, hey, I've worked with, writers that have come from an acting background before, but I've never, worked with a writer who's come from a directing background before. And is there anything particular, you acquire from your plays or the process? And I was like, oh gosh, that's such a good question. It totally makes sense. And I have no desire to wear both of those hats at once. And so I think there's something, I think something that you and I have in common is we both respect the text and we trust it. And again, right, that trust is also rooted in there being room for interpretation because, as we said, we don't have definitive versions of these plays. So, anytime, I mean, I don't know how many versions of Merry Wives I had floating around when we were working on it, but I was like, okay, because there was so much prose in this play, and the prose I feel like is can be more challenging because there's something about the container of the verse that sometimes that structure is helpful. But anyway, I always compare and contrast. And again, I think part of the journey to adaptation for me came from Shakespeare and coming to realize that I had choices to be made in texts that when I was in school, I was told were sort of definitive or more fixed, you know?
So now if I link those sort of like early experiences with Shakespeare to then you were a science kiddo, you weren't even a theater kiddo yet. And I know a little bit of your background in that you were first a stenographer. Will you just share with my viewers a little bit of how you even got into the theater and then what that journey was to being a director and then how you ended up directing Shakespeare?
Yeah. Well, I think first I started out as an enthusiastic audience member, you know. I was very privileged to have access to a lot of live performance as a kid, not just plays. I was really into ice skating, right? I had a Christy Yamaguchi phase, so I was like, my mom took me to the ice capades, you know, whatever, Muppets on ice. I'm gonna talk about adaptation. How are we putting those Disney movies on ice? Can I get that job? And so I was, and I also think like, right, culturally, my dad's side of the family in Mumbai is very performative. Two of my uncles were actors. One of my cousins is a professional costume designer. Another is a choreographer. And it was just sort of like, not even weddings, but like, you know, cultural festivals, events, like there would be some sort of performance. And so I think like an appetite for both participating in and enjoying as an audience member some sort of live performance was always there. I did grow up a STEM kid. You know, the thing is like I grew up in the gifted program, weird flex. But I think like at the time, I think if you were a young girl in the gifted program in the 90s, they pushed you towards STEM, like regardless of where your interests were. And so I was like, okay, this is what people are telling me I'm good at. And it actually wasn't until I went to, shout out to the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy in Aurora, Illinois. And I sort of went to this magnet high school. It's a public school that at the time pulled people from all over the state of Illinois, has now started accepting international and out-of-state applicants, somewhat controversial amongst the alumni pool. But anyway, at the time, I think one of my friends described it as like a pigeonhole for people who didn't like to be pigeonholed. But it also for me was like, you know, I was immersed amongst all these people who were academically gifted. And, you know, the vibe was sort of, okay, well, everybody's smart here. So what kind of smart are you? And I found that like, I was no longer really interested in being, you know, spending those 10,000 hours, as Simon Sinek would say, on like physics or chemistry or trig. I would much rather be spending that time, you know, English literature, poetry, and I ran the drama club. So one of the cool things, or I was the president, excuse me. There was a guy named Tony DeSanto who was our advisor. But like one of the things that was cool about, you know, the drama club at the Math and Science Academy was that we did everything. Like the traditional high school model in my hometown was, well, you had the English teacher, and the English teacher directed the plays because again, the English teacher was the expert interpreter of the plays. And again, it sort of like reinforced this more hierarchical approach to the text. And then like, you know, I remember actually, Tony will tell you, I got my acceptance to the Math and Science Academy. I said, I need to call before I accept. I need to talk to the head of the theater program. I'm concerned that you don't do musicals, was like 14-year-old Lavina. So, you know, again, the seeds were always kind of there. I think it was a combination of, you know, I went to the Math and Science Academy and people were like, you want to act, you want to stage manage, you want to design, you want to direct. Like, great, I did all of those things. The first play I ever directed was Inherit the Wind, because what else are you going to do at the Math and Science Academy but direct a play about the Scopes monkey trial. But then also my first taste of Chekhov was at IMSA. And I remember I then went, so it was a combination of that and I did do a pre-college program at Northwestern called the Cherub Program, which a lot of folks who then go on to study theater in schools, not necessarily at Northwestern, but a lot of those folks did go on to study theater. And it was there that both Carnegie Mellon was put on my radar, which is where I went for undergrad and my first master's. But also, I think really for me, it was like the first time that I was immersed around people who were pursuing the arts as a profession. And like for me, again, growing up, like the arts was always there. Of course, you dance at the parties, you perform in these plays, but it was always something that people did on the side. It was always something, sort of more extracurricular. And even at IMSA, it was okay, well, you do your math and science homework, and then you can, make plays and be in the show choir after school. Okay. And there was something about that experience at Cherubs that made me go, oh, okay, I think if these people are doing this, I think I would like to do that too. I hadn't seen a lot of people who look like me in those programs. And I will still say, as I remember when we were at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, like one of the questions I was asked when I was applying to the FAIR program is, where do you have privilege? And maybe the follow-up was, how do you choose to spend it? I don't know. But for me, one of the many places I have privilege is like, I'm a South Asian woman with 3 degrees and playing pretend. I have incredibly supportive parents who I'm going to go see a movie with. I'm going to go see A Nice Indian Boy. Shout out to Madhuri Shaker. Play adapted into a movie after this. So I got really lucky in that I had parents who were brave and willing to support this kid in the arts. I always knew I've never had a great appetite to be a soloist. I liked being in a choir. I liked doing a group dance. I liked being in a play with a small role, but I knew I didn't have an appetite for acting. I hadn't really thought much about directing at the time because, again, that felt like something that the grown-ups did, right? And so I went to study design because I knew I was a tech kid who really liked playing around with lights and sound in the booth. And there was something sort of like mathematical about that, right? All that time I spent hand drafting. My father's an engineer, so like, okay. But I also remember learning Aristotle's Poetics as a freshman and going, wait a minute, spectacle is last? We're just spectacle, right? And like, I remember all of us had like, in the design program, kind of how to feel about that. And then it was funny, it was towards the end of so I started taking directing classes at Carnegie right away, like in my freshman year, and I just sort of never stopped. And then there wasn't a dramaturgy program at the time. And so I both had an appetite for dramaturgy as well as because I wasn't a directing major, I wasn't like first in line to get into rooms as an assistant director, but like nobody was drama. And like we were doing Arcadia. We were doing like effective gamma rays, Men in the Group Marigolds. Like we were doing a whole season of science plays. So I was like, do y'all need a dramaturg? And I was like, okay. So the appetite for drama, I think one, I've always had an appetite for text analysis, but two, it was also like how I could start to find my place in a rehearsal room when, and again, I think I love dramaturging Shakespeare plays because like somebody once said to me, like, you get to be the idea designer or you get to be the ghost light for the text, right? The light that is, shining and hopefully helping guide the whole team towards something that is cohesive. And, so yes, at the end of my junior year, the faculty at Carnegie sat me down and told me, hey, we don't think you're a designer. We think you're a director. And I cried because I felt like, no, I was set out to do this one thing. And I sort of didn't, it took me a long time to like see that as the gift that it was of somebody saying like, no, actually, like, because what I would always get stuck, I would get stuck in ground planning. I would get stuck in research. And I would like, and maybe again, it's that thing of like, you want to provide a container for the play, but like, I don't know, some people design sort of more outside in, like here's the mold and the play will fit to it, as opposed to like, well, here's the play and here's the best container for it. And those things can ultimately, I think, end up looking the same. Like, as you were saying earlier, right? Somebody could look at your work or my work and see and describe it as like, conceptual or auteur-like, but like, the people in the room know the difference. Anyway, that's a long way of saying, I don't know, my buddy Jack Ruler likes to say I'm the great generalist and specialist of the theater. And I think part of it is too, like, I don't know, I've yet to have a job in the theater that I didn't like. I'd still, if somebody needed me to, I'd hop on the phone and work box office. I like talking to patrons. I wasn't the best in the costume shop, but like I can sew some labels into things. I don't know. There's something there's always been something like you were talking about, like directing as it relates to parenting, excuse me, on another episode, and I don't have that experience, but like directing as it relates to playing team sports, or like, or making plays as it relates to being part of a team. I think that's something that I've always had an appetite for, even though I wasn't always great at sports.
Oh my goodness. I just watched the okay, I did not watch the NCAA men's final. Sorry, but I did watch the women's final. And I immediately was on Threads like, I think I missed my calling. Like I am such a team sports girly. But I think it's so like low key, but I'll be teaching directing in the fall, and I was like, I think I'm gonna have my directing students go to a basketball game, or like I'm like, I've said this on other episodes of this podcast before, so if anybody's consistently watching, they know that I'm like, basketball can teach directors so much about the kinesphere and kinesthetic response and stuff. So I'm glad to know I'm not the only person that's like, oh, I do theater because it's a team sport. And therefore I also am really into the swag, which I guess maybe not everybody is, but I'm like, can we get some show shirts and a breakaway? Like
Friend, mentor, nemesis, Joseph Haj runs the Guthrie, and they have that massive, of course, thrust stage with like 1,100 seats, and he is also a sports enthusiast and has often said he would like a t-shirt cannon for the thrust, which I think, like, yes, like that's right. Like if we talk about the experience of watching a play in Shakespeare's day, I actually have to imagine it's more like going to a contemporary sports event than it is to go to a contemporary play.
Yeah, I think so. So what was the first Shakespeare play you directed?
That I directed? I'm pretty sure that's Twelfth Night, which I know is a play you also love. It was also the first play I stage managed. I stage managed that play at the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy. Illinois' best and brightest, right? I did not design the set. I stage managed it, but for some reason, we had decided we wanted Orsino and Viola in some sort of like chaise lounge situation. And we didn't have one of those. We didn't have a huge budget. I don't know who had the idea to take one of those like folding lawn chairs and like upholster it and then try to have two people canoodle in it. But like that thing collapsed on a nightly basis. And I was just like, oh man. And it was funny. It was the first play I ever directed back in 2012. And I remember, and it was the first equity play I'd ever directed. I think that's right. I think I'd like assisted, or I'd like been in equity houses, but I think that's right. It's the first equity play I'd ever directed. And it was outdoors. And I did not, in my own words, identify as queer at the time. But my read on that play and my read on As You Like It when I did it years later was like, I think those are queer love stories. Like, I just think there are, I think. And like, feels sort of obvious now to me to say like, oh yeah, there's a queer voice to these Shakespeare plays, but I think especially the rom-coms, and I think like one of the things that, interests me, there's so much in these act fives to tie up. But I think when all is said and done, revealed in these Shakespeare plays, there are a lot of people like Viola needs to, I think, wrestle with the fact that like, yes, she ends up with Cesario, but the person she was first attracted to was a woman, right? And like, I just think, right, the Antonio Sebastian relationship is such a bittersweet love story. Well, anyway, yeah, I don't know if you were asking me what excited me about that play, but like that, I think what intrigued me about it then, and probably what still intrigued me about it now.
Okay, I love that play. I love it so much. I've done it several times well, and I have the opening lines emblazoned on my right forearm. So, if music be the food of love, play on. So turning back to now your sort of robust work as an adapter, and that seemingly having blossomed out of just doing Shakespeare cuts, you you are adapting all sorts of stuff, and like more radically now, right? Like the Chekhov, you're doing some Austen. So like tell me
Yeah.
about some of your adaptations.
You know, it was funny. I was talking to somebody recently who was like, "Oh, you're genre hungry," and I was like, "Oh, because you do the Austen, you do the Agatha Christie, you do the Dickens," and I was like, "Yeah, it's true." But again, I do think that comes from being both a Shakespeare nerd and a Bollywood brat. That like, you know, one of the many things that jams me when I talk to people who are not as well versed in Bollywood as I am is that a lot of times they have the impression that they're just love stories, they're just rom coms, and it's like, oh, dude, have you not seen a Bollywood action movie? Let's sit down and watch Doom. Let's sit down and watch all three of these movies, Doom 1, 2, and 3, which are basically like, you know, the Indian Fast and Furious. Like, it's just, you know, and then let's watch a family drama. Let's watch, you know, a Bollywood supernatural movie, right? And I feel like the same is true for like Shakespeare, right? Like one of the reasons, you know, these plays can fit into a lot of genres and support a lot of styles, right? And so I think like I try to write things again because I don't like to direct my own work. Part of that is like I just like to collaborate. Part of that I think also is like being the child of immigrants is like, well, you have one job, get somebody else a job, right? And so I try to write things that are like director, actor, designer friendly, especially director and designer because you know I've worn those hats, and like I try to write something into every play that feels like a fun challenge to solve, like not totally impossible, but like something creative. Where you know, I think uh, one of the things I like about directing these Shakespeare plays, as opposed to sometimes in new work, I feel like there's so much focus on the development of the text and the writer's voice, which I think there should be for a first production. But then sometimes as a director, been left feeling like my vision had to take a little bit of a back seat, as opposed to like these Shakespeare plays. I mean, people have seen Hamlet, people have seen dozens of Twelfth Nights or Romeo and Juliet, so I don't feel any compulsion to. Of course, I want to serve the text, but I don't have any need to do it the way it's always been done. In that same way. So anyway, yeah, that's a long way of saying, yeah, I do a lot of things as an adapter. My buddy Steve likes to joke that I have this like 0 to 10 things I hate about you scale in terms of faithfulness. So like, I don't know, my Chekhov, the Dickens tends to be very textually faithful. And then for whatever reason, like the 8, 9, 10 in the canon is a lot of the South Asian epics. Is like I've been working on Shakuntala, which is a Kalidasa play. I've got a like 3-part cycle based on the Ramayana. I've been working on on and off since 2015, and those plays, and in part because I feel like I am often okay, so for me to pick up something as a director, or excuse me, as an adapter, I have to first love the text, but I also feel like there has to be something that I feel like is left unsaid, or like a right I need to wrong in a way. So or a wrong I need to right. Hi. So for example, I've written a play called Ado, which is based on Much Ado About Nothing, and is sort of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead for the women of Much Ado. So it takes place between what I call wedding gone wrong and wedding gone right. So from when Hero is left for dead at the altar to when she makes the decision to go and marry Claudio again. Because I don't know, something I've always struggled with in that play. I will dramaturgically, the major dramatic question of that play is, will Hero marry Claudio? I think. Like I learned this from reading I Save the Cat, that like Alice's book for, right? And one of the things it said was like oftentimes in rom-coms, what you think of as the like main love story, it's actually structurally the B plot. And that kind of broke my brain open. I was like, that's right. When you look at Much Ado, Beatrice Bendick's story, which we all love and cherish, is actually structurally the B plot. Like, if Hero and Claudio don't get engaged, we don't get the whole plot of like setting those two up to fall in love with each other. And if that relationship doesn't get fixed, I don't think there's space for B and B to be together at the end. And so, anyway, so I've written this play, but like, we don't, in the text of Much Ado, you know this, we don't see hero at all from Wedding Gone Wrong to Wedding Gone Right. So like she is horribly slut-shamed and left for dead by her, sure, one true love, but like, you know, there's some stuff to work through, and she has nothing on the page from Shakespeare to do it. And I've always had an issue with that. As a director, I've muscled in non-textual moments for her to be present before that second wedding. That again, I do feel like is serving the story, but one could argue, is that a little bit of a concept? Well, yeah, so I wrote a whole play about that. The CAATA, which is the first play I ever wrote, which is a solo show based on the Ramayana, was written because a lot of Sita's journey as a kid, you know, I went to Hindu Sunday school classes, put that aside, bit of an oxymoron, but like there were just parts of the story that nobody told me. Nobody told me about this Agni Pariksha that after she's kidnapped by the villain Ravan and rescued by her husband Ram, she still has to like literally walk through fire to prove her purity to this man. And like just that was always glossed over in school because it was a story of Ram. It was a story of this epic battle. And I was just like, well, yeah, but what about the battle of the woman who's been abducted? What about the battle of the woman who has to stay strong every day and say, no, Ravan, I will not marry you. I am Ram's wife, and I know that he is going to come for me. So and a lot of times I do think, I don't know, I'm told those are feminist takes on the play. I also just think like, you know, that's the story, right? And I just recentered it. Which is a lot of, actually, now going back to 12th Night, like that was something when I first directed that was important to me, was like, there are a lot of people who get treated badly at the end of that play. And yeah. we generally acknowledge Malvolio's, you know, prank. But like Sir Andrew is taken advantage of by his friends. Again, Sebastian is taken advantage of in many ways. And so it was important to me when I was directing that play back in 2012, who knows how I do it now, but you know, back in 2012 when I did it, I was like, okay, we get the couples getting together. I think we want to see, you know, Viola and Orsino, and we want to see Cesario and Olivia. But then I also think, right, one of the reasons this play sticks with us is it's somewhat bittersweet. And so I think one of the nicest compliments I got in grad school was, Lavina, you tend to shine the spotlight on people who don't always get it. And I think like that's one of the things too that drew me to adaptation was especially, you know, Shakespeare, Christmas Carol, those are shorter texts, but like some of these, you take on an Austen, you take on a full-length Dickens, you take on, you know, an Agatha Christie, you have to condense so much so that it becomes a question, right, of, well, what do you want to focus on? And you know, usually, if I feel like I want to focus on something that has already, you know, I loved working on Persuasion, and I've been working on Emma, but I don't feel like, though I like Pride and Prejudice, I don't feel like I have anything new to say about that text compared to, you know, when I look at all of the many great adaptations that are out there. So like, yes, I love Austen, but I'm not necessarily going to jump in the ring with every single one, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm working on, so a due will go up at Indianapolis Shakes early next year. And I'm really excited about that. I've been working on an Agatha Christie murder mystery, The Mystery of the Blue Train. And also just because I mean, they're so in the zeitgeist right now. And again, like as somebody who is, you know, enjoys high style pieces, somebody who is, you know, genre hungry, like they're just fun. But also the one that I'm working on, one I think is not a popular Christie that is picked up, so that's what sort of drew me to it. I was very drawn to the protagonist, Catherine Gray, and also I felt like though the love story on the page is a very cis het love story, I was like, oh, I think there's a queer voice to this piece that wants to be explored. So that there's my 3-part Ramayana cycle. So part 1 is the CAATA focused on, so it's focusing on the three sort of women in the Ramayana who I consider heroines and who I think like kind of got done dirty in terms of like their stories. So Sita, I think, is often put up on a pedestal as the ideal woman, but like, what does that mean? And if we're going to call her the ideal woman, I think we should also talk about many of the things she had to go through, many of the things Ram put her through. Kai, who is often considered the like evil queen or evil stepmother of Ram, in sort of more traditional mask tellings of the text. But I don't feel like I can tell you, but like when we allow these things to go beyond the good bad binary, when we allow them to be just more than light and dark, good and evil, I think there's, some really interesting potential for empathy there. So part 2 is written and is getting workshopped with EnActe Arts in the Bay Area. They're sort of bi-coastal Bay Area, New York, but a South Asian company. And then part 3 will be about Surpunika, who is Ravan, again, the demon king, his sister, who is not a major player in the story, and again, if at all featured, gets kind of vilified and typecast as jealous. But like there is a read on the text in the South, right? My family is North Indian, but in the South, Ravan and those guys, the closer you get to Lanka, right? They are heroes. And so there are versions of the text where Surpunika, his sister, is not only much more empowered, there's a read on the test that's this whole famous battle that we all think about, like that was her doing, that she orchestrated that whole thing. And I just think I think it's really interesting to recenter these stories and to, again, just like shed some spotlight around people who don't often get it. But I'll also say, Aditi Kapil wrote this Displaced Hindu Gods trilogy that Mixed Blood did. Maybe like 10 years ago. But there is something, I do find trilogies very satisfying. And so like, my hope is that all of these plays can be performed on their own, but also that like someday, somehow, somebody will do them all in rep. One, because I think it would be great to see the story told in that way. 2, it would provide jobs to a ton of Desi artists. And like, that is something that I think, right, right when I first moved to Chicago, right when I graduated from Carnegie, I ran a theater company called Rusika, the Midwest's first South Asian American ensemble, for like 5 or 6 years. I kind of got voluntold into the work, as we say. But I liked it and I was good at it. And one of the things I really liked about it was, as an artistic director, when I was a casting director, you get to provide jobs for people. And I think I had this from my parents, my dad especially, but like that was something I always appreciated about that work, was the ability to provide jobs for people. And so like, when I am writing about plays, we said a lot in grad school, we say a lot. I serve on the board of NPN, and we say, a budget is a living document that reflects our morals. And like, I do think budgeting is ethics. And so for me, like part of it is, okay, well, when I budget, how many bodies are going to be on stage? What types of bodies are going to be on stage? Like that's part of my values. And as a playwright, sometimes you can be in control of those things, the director, sometimes we're talking about you're not. But like for me as a director, if I write a play called the SITAYANA and it's a solo show and I say, you must cast a South Asian woman as Sita, well, like that's, guaranteeing a job in a way that a lot of other solo shows don't.
Yeah. What is your process of adaptation? I mean, like the whole, like from the, like, I read this thing that's really good, or even somebody's like, hey, have you read this? We want to do it next season. Like from picking up that source material, what do you do? Step 1.
Well, step 1, I read it. And I try to just like read it. It's funny. One of my professors in graduate school is a guy named Damon Kiley. He wrote a book called How to Read a Play that I do recommend as a script analysis book. But I spent a lot of time with him as his graduate assistant, helping transcribe interviews. And he interviewed a lot of, contemporary directors and asked, I think, every single one of them, hey, how much do you trust that first read of a play? Like, because some people are like, oh my God, the first time I get to experience a play with fresh eyes, that's like the closest I'll ever be, to an audience member. Virgin eyes and ears, our pal Sarah Bruner likes to say. And so some people are like very trusting of that first read. And some people are like, oh no, I need to sit down with the play and read it like 20 or 30 times, right? And actually probably most people fall somewhere in between, right? But I do, for something I'm adapting, I do really try, if I haven't read it before, to just read it as an audience member, or if it's something I have read before, like I'm working on The Secret Garden, which was a novel I loved as a kid, try to pick it up without the lens of like, what might I do to this play, right? Just to try to like enjoy it as much as I can. And then, I start sort of dreaming about it. I start sort of journaling about how I might see it. there's a and Damon writes about this in How to Read a Play, but when I was at DePaul getting my MFA in directing, there was 6 questions that our professors, Damon and Lisa, felt like you have to answer about a play. Let's see if I remember them. What kind of play is it? Which I think gets a genre. What's the play about in a word or 2, but like not more than that, not a full sentence. I think maybe gets a theme. What's the major dramatic question, right? Which gets a plot. There is a spine of the play. What is the like core action that everybody is doing? And there are 2 more that I'm not going to remember right now. But I find that what is the play about in a word or 2 to be a really useful question. And actually, even though I don't know that as a director, well, I don't know. Major dramatic questions with Chekhov plays are hard because they're so ensemble driven, right? But I did find the task of, even just as an exercise, naming a protagonist for each one of those 4 plays was a useful exercise. So it's not always all of those 6 questions, right? Obviously, 2 of them I can't remember. One of them is like, what is the cry of the play? Oh, cry of the play, and what effect do you want it to have on the audience? So anyway, sometimes I pull out those questions. It depends, but so usually I read it and I fall in love with it and I start to get a sense of like how I might shape the story, right? Based on both that read, based on my politics, my opinions, and then based on that directorial analysis. Like, I don't know. Siegel, I think, is Constantine's play, but every single act starts with Masha. So there's something interesting to me about that. And I think one of the things that makes my adaptation of Siegel unique is I think there's more focus given to that Masha and that Masha-Constantine relationship than there might be in other versions. Again, is that a feminist read on the text? Is that giving the woman more space? Or is that just what I think the story should be? Kind of both. Yeah. And then I find first drafts, I find them so arduous. I find them, and I think because part of that too is it's that process of you're just kind of chipping away at a block of marble and you're figuring out how it's going to take and oh shoot, there's a vein there I didn't know was there. Okay, maybe I can't chip away over here. And so and I also think that first pass is hardest because it's the most lonely. Because then from there I go to I'm really fortunate to have a lot of great collaborators, many of whom are available on Zoom. We got really good at reading on plays online back in 2020. And so, I'll just get a group of people because I do, and I think this comes from being a Shakespeare director, that I tend to hear a play before I see it. Which isn't true for everybody, right? Some people see a play first. And there are some plays that I see first before I hear the music of them. But when I'm adapting, when I'm working on a Shakespeare play, I need to hear the music. And for me, because I don't come from an acting background, I may do a little bit of voiceover, but I don't come from, so I find actor readings and feedback invaluable just because that process is so different than mine. And I just like being in a room. And so from then on out, right, it's a refining process that maybe is going back and forth into some sort of workshop or reading format. But from then, I really do find after that first read helps me figure out, okay, from that analysis, this is what I thought the play was about. This is what type of story I thought it was. This is the effect I wanted to have an audience. But then after that first reading, I get to hear from people what they think the play was about, what effect it had on them. And so then from there, it's a question of well, how do I get those 2 things to be close together, right? What I'm working on and what they're receiving. And sometimes the 2 meet in the middle. Sometimes, and sometimes I'm oh, shoot, somebody revealed to me something about the play that I didn't know I was saying, or I didn't know I felt was there. And then I sort of have to adjust what I think I'm working on as a result. Yeah. I think that's it. I don't know. I'm still sort of figuring it out, right?
Yeah. Do you do you type it all out again from you have the Agatha Christie novel here in your lap and you type it out?
I do. I used to copy paste, but I actually think there is something about the magic of actually typing it out. And I do think I'm a monster. I write plays in Google Docs.
Mm.
Yeah, I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's free. Two, and I cannot tell, we were just talking about like how many computers I've lost and how many drafts I've lost. I just won't ever lose it, right? And three, I flip and love that version history stuff because
Yes.
sometimes I'll do a rewrite and I was like, oh, actually, I would love to pull up the version of this play that I thought I was writing a month ago. And Google Docs just makes it so easy. There's so many extensions out there. I think I just typed like screenplay formatter into Google and like
Yes.
free one. Yeah. And so I think I mostly use that. But yeah, I do my like dreaming and scheming about the play is like pen or pencil to paper. But the rest, because I do, and especially because I found myself saying during a Christmas Carol interview, because that play especially, like, it's a novella, not a novel, so there was, the majority of the material is there. There wasn't as much proportionally to cut away as there is with, a full length Austen or etc. But I found myself saying, especially for that one, like, I feel like as an adapter, my job is to choreograph the words on the page. And like that's what I think is fun about it. It's like figuring out how to make, the characters dance together and how to make that work off a page in a way that's exciting, but also still like leaves room for interpretation for, again, actors, directors, a design team to come in and like, do their thing. Because I don't know, because I never liked when I was wearing those hats working on texts that were overly prescriptive,
Yeah. Yeah. I know a couple playwrights who still do everything longhand before they type it up. I'm not there yet, but I do outline, like I outline everything and I small notes everything, like the images, the words, like maybe if it's just like a turn of phrase or something, um, there in my like pen to paper always, before I type it. But then I get to that place where I'm like, okay, well, we're not gonna write out the full thing just to retype it. But I work in final draft because it made me feel like a professional. But Lauren Gunderson works in Google Docs. At least
Really?
on the
Oh my God, I feel
projects,
so validated.
yeah. On the projects I've worked with her on, she works in Google Docs. I think for the same reasons you said that, like,
I love it.
it's there, it's free, it's easy. You can track your versions. You can invite people into the
Oh,
document to just leave their comments or not. You can export it to PDF to like you just have, it's a very malleable thing. Whereas definitely me working in final draft, especially for things that are going to a theater, it's not
yeah.
malleable at all. Like
Yeah.
you send them a PDF, they want it in a Word, and then I'm so like, but I don't want anybody messing with my format.
Right? What about my pretty fonts?
Leave my formatting alone. But I end up having to like convert it to Word to send it, and I'm like, why did I pay all this money for Final Draft and nobody uses it? But I definitely making that purchase made me feel like I'm a writer. I write screenplays. Lavina, I we've gone all around the world and back, and I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. But I know that you have a movie date with your folks,
Yeah.
and I promised to get you out of here on time. So thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll check in again soon to hear how your projects are brewing.
Thank you. Hey, can I plug something? Are we allowed to plug things on?
Yes, plug all
Okay.
the things.
So I mentioned in passing, I'm a board member of the National New Play Network, and one of the things that NNPN does is it hosts a website called the New Play Exchange, which I think, right, we can do old plays and new ones. Get you a girl who does both, right? But the New Play Exchange, fantastic database for people looking to find plays, for writers looking to share their work. But the thing we just rolled out yesterday that I'm super excited about is the actor platform. Yeah. So writers like myself upload their plays and can tag monologues in those plays that they think might be good for actors to perform, for an audition, for whatever. And so I personally have uploaded like 70 plus monologues from my plays. But it's, I believe it's $15 a year. It's a very reasonable subscription fee. And even if that's inaccessible to you, Ain't no problem with that. I think there are still resources, but yeah, if you're looking for monologues, because like one of the things that's really cool, as a writer, as I was uploading monologues, you can tag identities based on age, based on gender, based on racial, ethnic identity. I can't remember what else, but that means that like you can search for monologues based on those identities. So if you feel like, well, if you are I'll use myself as an example. If you're a 40-something South Asian cis woman, you can like put those identifiers in, and I'm looking for something that is less than 2 minutes and hopefully funny. Like I can put that search in the database and it will tell me what comes up, which is, I think, kind of amazing. Again, not nice, but I imagine would be useful to them.
I think wildly useful, and useful for educators like me who are always trying to help students find new material.
Yeah, and if you're a student, ask your institution if they have a platform or an account, because yeah, you can have one as an institution as well.
Even better for them. LJ, thank you so much.
Fred, it was good to see you.
Let's go.